thank you for the courage of these ladies to come forward today, Lord, and testify about what they've gone through. And we just ask you to continue surrounding them with your kindness and your love. Lord, we love you and praise you. In your son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Chairman. Members of the committee, I mentioned to y'all as you walked in, we have some proposed rules for the committee in front of you. Very similar to other committees that we've had here in the Senate. I think each of you has had a chance to review those rules. I'll entertain a motion to adopt those rules that will guide us in our committee's work as we get started. Have a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion. We adopt the committee rules for Senate Special Committee on Protection of Women's Sports.
We have a motion from Caucus Chairman Jason Abbott-Tarte. Do we have a second? Second. Any discussion? All those in favor of adopting the rules as presented, please signify by raising your hand. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. I do want to take a couple of minutes and kind of talk about why we're here and talk about the important work that we've been charged with by our Lieutenant Governor, Burt Jones. I want to thank Lieutenant Governor Jones for forming this committee under Senate Resolution 4. The powers given to him under Senate Resolution 4 are what establishes this committee. He has instructed us to look into the issue of how women's sports can be protected both at the high school, collegiate levels here in the state of Georgia, and has given us until December 15th to complete our work. My anticipation is to hold monthly meetings between now and December, and then to submit a committee report that will hopefully provide clarity on this issue, that will highlight the committee's good work, and potentially will outline legislative priorities that the committee finds are worth looking into in the upcoming legislative session. I want to thank each of the committee members for your time here today. Look forward to productive, respectful, and healthy debate as the Senate is known for having, and as each one of you members certainly embody in your own work within the Senate. I think that part of what I want to do as well, before we do ask the ladies to testify, is maybe set the backdrop for how we got to where we are today, and as to why this situation is particularly important in Georgia. In my early days in the Senate, this was the idea of, quote, save girls sports was a topic that was bantered around, I think first perhaps by Representative Singleton in the House. I know Representative Todd Jones took up work on this issue as well, but ultimately we passed a bill in 2022 that dealt with high school athletics, and we relegated decision-making responsibility both to a committee and to the Georgia High School Association. And the Georgia High School Association and that committee since adopted rules for high school athletics that in the state of Georgia, for public schools, athletics would be composed and would be competed in under by the gender assigned by the athletes at birth. The law and our current law in Georgia was silent on the topic of collegiate athletics. And what I think is interesting is that same year that we were debating and passing that bill here at the Capitol, there was about 5 minutes from here, a women's swimming and diving national championship that took place that became somewhat famous at the time because of the inclusion of Leah Thomas in the championship that took place at Georgia Tech. I'll say personally that for me, I was aware of the competition. I was not aware that the competition took place at Georgia Tech. I'd heard the name of Leah Thomas, had heard about that Leah Thomas had won a national championship, but was not aware that that had taken place in Georgia. One of the things in our debate in 2022 that we often heard was that legislation like this was a solution in search of a problem. That this is a fake issue, that this is an issue that never comes up, that this is hypothetical. And ironically, at the very time that we were debating this for high school athletics, it became a very real issue for the 5 women who will hear testimony from today, as well as other women who took part in that national championship at Georgia Tech. All 5 women who will testify today were All-American swimmers. All 5 of them are plaintiffs in a federal lawsuit. That federal lawsuit alleges that the NCAA, the University System of Georgia, Georgia Tech, and others violated the Title IX protections. Title IX, of course, being the 1972 piece of legislation that really established women's rights in academia, but also mentioned the participation in sports. That lawsuit is making its way through the federal court system and something that we're watching keenly. We have had conversations with the university system. We've invited the university system and Georgia Tech both to participate in today's testimony. They have declined due to the pending litigation. We will continue to extend an invitation for them to testify. I, as chairman of the committee, sent a letter to Georgia Tech and asked for a number of documents, particularly documents as it related to correspondence between the NCAA and Georgia Tech for their bid process to be hosts of the national championship, and then specifically what was communicated between Georgia Tech and the NCAA as it related to locker room usage, competition, et cetera. We received a partial response, I believe it was on Monday, from Georgia Tech. That response included things like the NCAA's policy, maps, and plans that were basically the venue map for the day of the week of competition that happened at Georgia Tech. We did not receive anything responsive to our request as it related to the correspondence between the NCAA and Georgia Tech on locker room usage and specifically Leah Thomas's participation in that event. We received an invitation from Georgia Tech in that letter to communicate with their attorney for the further documents that we wish to seek. And we will have, or I will be responding to their letter with an additional request for documents and reiterating our request that we would like to see specifically what the correspondence was between Georgia Tech and the NCAA as it related to the issues that this committee is charged with looking into. I think the last thing that I'd like to say, and I think the ladies may testify to some of this, this competition took place in the midst of a changing landscape as far as it related to the NCAA's policies. The NCAA's Board of Governors had passed a policy, I believe in 2010 or 2011, that said that athletes would compete on their gender assigned at birth. In 2022, there was a separate policy that was adopted that allowed the inclusion of male swimmers, I should say male athletes, in female competition, provided that there was a 1-year period under which there was hormone therapy that was undergone by the athlete. And then since then, there's been other sport-specific regulations that have been passed that essentially put in place rules on a sports-specific basis where they defer to the governing bodies of the specific sport. So I would say that even as we look into what we want to do as a legislative body as it relates to our state-funded colleges and universities, it's important for the committee to understand that even amongst the NCAA, this has been an ongoing morphing policy as their positions on this have changed. So with that, I would like to thank the 4 ladies who are here to testify, and then Reka, who is going to testify from Virginia on Zoom. Would like to thank you all for being here. You guys reached out to us when the committee was formed and asked if you could testify, and we're happy to have you here today. I also said in the paper this morning, and we'll say before this microphone today as well, that should Leah Thomas wish to come and testify before this committee, that we would welcome that opportunity to hear testimony as well. And with that, we're going to get to our agenda. And Kylie Allens, who formerly swam at NC State University, if you step forward here, you're on witness mic number 2. I'm going to make your microphone live. If you don't mind putting your placard that was at your seat in front of you when you testify, that'd be fantastic. And Kylie, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Kylie Allens. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before this special committee of the Georgia Senate. I am here to share with you what it is like to dream as a young girl of swimming in an NCAA championship, to work for your entire life to reach the top of elite women's collegiate swimming, and then to be let down by those who govern college swimming. The shock of what happened to me here in Georgia at the 2022 NCAA Division I Swimming and Diving National Championships has been so great that I'm still processing it. And if I'm honest, at times I'm still grieving it. Until last year, I swam for North Carolina State University, which is one of the top women's swimming programs in the nation. Over my career, I was a 31-time All-American, a 5-time ACC champion, an Olympic trials semifinalist, and a 2-time NCAA champion. From the time that I was a little girl dreaming of competing in the NCAAs, Until last year when I retired from the sport, swimming consumed my entire life. I trained 20+ hours a week in the pool, including 9 practices and 3 lifting sessions a week, all while completing a rigorous bachelor's and master's engineering curriculum at NC State. I regularly competed and trained with some of the female swimmers you may have recently seen on TV bringing home medals for Team USA in Paris. College athletics has given me a great deal, but I also gave everything I had to my university and to college athletics. I gave up many opportunities and college experiences to help my team become a powerhouse in the NCAA and achieve sport goals that I dreamed of for so long. I value the life lessons I learned in sport, and I believe that college sports are a critical aspect of the environment on a college campus. College athletics builds school spirit, it promotes awareness of a school, it helps the recruitment of all students, not just student athletes, and it gives students a diversion from the rigors of studies and tests. Of course, universities do not just give something to student athletes, they do take things from us too. And the largest governing body in college athletics, the NCAA, greatly profits from college athletes and athletics as well. The NCAA receives billions of dollars from college sports. By promoting themselves as the guardians of the high ideals of college sports, and the NCAA and its member colleges and universities obtain lucrative sponsorships and media rights deals. Unfortunately, Georgia Tech and the NCAA have misused their influence, and I have experienced firsthand the consequences of their decision to betray the women that they claim to champion. At the 2022 NCAA Division I Swimming and Diving Championships, I was required by Georgia Tech University, the host of the championships, and by the NCAA to compete against and to change in the same locker room as male swimmer Leah Thomas. I first found out about Leah Thomas in the late fall of 2021. Thomas was posting nation-leading times for women, but I had never heard the name before. Upon further research, I found out that the swimmer was formerly known as Will Thomas and swam for the University of Pennsylvania men's swimming team previously. Thomas went from being ranked 65th in the NCAA Division I in the 500-yard freestyle as a member of the UPenn men's swimming team to swimming the fastest times in the nation in the 21-22 season in women's freestyle events while competing on the UPenn women's swimming team. At first, I was shocked and perplexed that the NCAA was allowing him to swim on the women's team and held out some hope that the NCAA would see the obvious injustice of allowing a man to compete against women, or that Georgia Tech University would stand up for women and insist on a change in the rules before the national championships. But as the year went on and Thomas continued to compete on the women's team, it started to become clear that no one was speaking up for the rights of women. Incredibly, Thomas was allowed to swim in the Ivy League championships where he demolished the women's field, and it began to appear that he would be allowed to compete at the women's national championships. Of course, as the season wore on, the Leah Thomas situation became national news and invoked a nationwide debate about males competing in women's sports. I occasionally talked about this developing situation with some of my teammates who were equally as confused and frustrated with how Thomas could continue to compete with women, despite having obvious physical advantages due to being a man. I was surrounded by many who understood this was wrong, and we wondered why those in charge were doing nothing. It was clear to observers that Thomas was not a technically proficient swimmer and had only qualified for the NCAA championships because of the physical advantages he possessed as a man. Thus, the NCAA knew that in each race that Thomas competed, they were effectively reserving a spot for a man to take a title or a placement that a woman otherwise would have earned. Yet, the NCAA did not ensure fairness for women competitors. Instead, they simply looked the other way. The silence surrounding this issue among college presidents, athletic departments, and sports officials who knew better was honestly one of the most shocking aspects of the situation. The unfairness of the competitions to women was open and obvious, yet no one had the courage to speak up and defend women's rights, and even worse, when some women tried to speak up, they were quickly criticized and silenced. Leading up to the NCAA championships, I was disheartened knowing that Thomas had already pushed up to 3 potential qualifiers out of the meet because they only select a number of competitors each year. I was relieved to know that I wouldn't have to race him in my 2 best events, but It greatly increased my mental stress to learn that on the last day of the championships, several of my teammates and I would be fighting to score points in the 100-yard freestyle event, in which Thomas was also entered. In addition to the added stress of having to compete against a male swimmer with innate and insurmountable physical advantages, I felt sadness knowing that his participation in the 500-yard freestyle and 200-yard freestyle events would certainly rob other women of placements, an opportunity to participate in a final, a trophy, or even a national title, including me. Nevertheless, could and put everything into my preparation for the championships, just trying to focus on what I could control. Looking back, I can see even more clearly the injustice of hundreds of women being required to suppress our feelings to validate the feelings of one man. On the first night of competition, when the 500 free was contested, I watched from the sidelines in sadness and shock as Thomas beat Emma Wyatt, who is one of the best female swimmers in the world, and stole the championship celebration from her, a moment for which Emma had worked her whole life. Emma was a silver medalist at both the Tokyo and the Paris Olympics and is one of the most technically superior swimmers in the world. That day, Emma was not beaten through technical proficiency, not by a long shot. Instead, Emma was deprived of her moment at the top of the podium solely because the NCAA and Georgia Tech University allowed a man to compete against her in the finals. This happened on the very first individual final of the meet, and it demonstrated what we had all feared from the beginning. Instead of an electric environment, the crowd went silent as the race was contested. Almost all attention, whether negative or positive, was directed towards Thomas instead of the women in that heat. Indeed, that entire NCAA Women's Championships from the start became all about one individual, a man whom the NCAA and Georgia Tech University chose to allow to compete. The entire championship became an enormous social experiment regarding how much abuse that women could be forced to take in silence from a man. The stress of competing against a man was at the forefront of my mind when I walked into the women's locker room at Georgia Tech. At the championships, the women's championships, both the women's and men's locker rooms are converted into women's locker rooms and are intended for women participants only. The coaches and the sports staff use another bathroom outside the natatorium. But on the first day of the competition, I used the competition locker room to change and quickly learned that Thomas was also able to change in those locker rooms. Immediately, a place where I used to feel safe and secure became a place where I felt exposed and uncomfortable. I tried to push these feelings aside, but I couldn't because I knew that at any moment a man could walk in and see me naked. In the sport of swimming, everyone wears these racing suits. So these suits are extremely tight, paper thin, and fragile. It can take up to 30 minutes to put these suits on the first time because you have to be careful to inch it up your body and not rip it. You go into the locker room several times a day because typically you only wear the suit for your race. At first, I changed with caution and just tried to use my parka and towel to cover myself while facing the locker or the wall. But being in that environment while preparing for my race was very anxiety-producing. Then I remembered that right behind my team's assigned bleachers, there was a storage closet. So even though competitors were supposed to change in the locker rooms, I actually began using the storage closet to change in and out of my tech suits and practice suits. The closet was dimly lit, was not as clean as the locker rooms, and had metal bins of swimming equipment lining the walls. But at that point, I was just thankful and relieved to have a place to change that was private, even if it was a storage closet, and even if there wasn't a lock on the door. Finally, on the last day of the meet came in the 100-yard freestyle. My final event was contested. I had made the A final, top 8 in both of my other events, but knew that it would be a challenge to make it back in this event, the 100 free. I was stressed more than I've ever been that morning, knowing that to qualify for a final, I would have to be one of the top 15 swimmers, essentially, because Thomas was advantaged against the entire field. In the end, I was beaten by Thomas. As my team exited the pool after prelims, the NCAA gave us all T-shirts, which were screen printed with the caption, celebrating 50 years of Title IX, which I initially thought was a joke. I didn't know that much about Title IX, but I knew that its premise was to give women equal opportunity in sports. It was beyond ironic to me that the NCAA was paying lip service to women's equality while disregarding women's bodily privacy and allowing a man to take away women's opportunities. What good is a women's division if a male swimmer can enter it and dominate the competition? And how can women have equal opportunities if a man can enter women's events and win, but no woman can enter men's events and win? It took me over a year to process those emotions, those complex emotions I felt during that season, and especially during that meet, in part because I think I was forced to suppress my emotions and take it all in stride. Those who compete at or have competed at an elite level in sports know that one has to put in an enormous amount of work to reach that level. Physically and mentally, it can be a huge challenge just to simply compete at this level and then be a student at the same time. But on top of that, the women who competed at the 2022 national championships and swam throughout that season were burdened with the consequences of Georgia Tech's and the NCAA's unwillingness to protect even our most basic rights. Being forced to compete against and change in the same locker room as a man disrupted my concentration and made it more difficult for me to compete at my best. Realizing that we had nobody willing to stand up for our rights took an emotional toll on us that stripped all joy from a competition that should have been the mountaintop moment in each of our careers. Over the past 2 years, I have begun to see the story that I lived through in the 2022 NCAA championships at Georgia Tech play itself over and over in other sports and age groups across the United States. I've retired from swimming, but I still feel the burden of that experience because I know what I went through. And I see that today there are many more young girls and women who are facing the same challenges. Regrettably, the Georgia Tech University and the NCAA are still unconcerned with protecting the rights of women athletes to equal opportunities in comparison to men, which is why I am testifying today. To me, the most disappointing thing about that meet is that it was entirely preventable. All the NCAA had to do was to simply uphold the equal opportunity premise of Title IX and not allow men to compete with the women's division. All Georgia Tech had to do was to uphold its normal policy of protecting women's locker rooms for women and tell the NCAA that if you are going to discriminate against women, you cannot hold your championship here. Had the university had the courage to do that, it may have prevented the massive and growing injustice for women it has encouraged. I can tell you from my experiences that the controversial social science experiment in which the NCAA and its member schools are currently engaged causes significant harm to women. To allow men to compete as a woman and require us to simply accept it strikes directly at our sense of self-worth. But now I'm not afraid to say that I believe that those who will not stand up for even the most basic human rights should not be given the responsibility of overseeing and championing college students. It is demoralizing to have our athletic achievements not recognized as unique and special, and to be put in the position of being beaten by mediocre male athletes that have not even mastered the same technical competence in our sport that women have achieved. I know what it takes to put in the work to get to the highest level of sports, and I'm concerned that many young girls will not do so in the future. If they're going to put in all that work only to be required to compete against men who can beat them without nearly the same degree of effort or sacrifice. Last October, U.S. Senator Mike Lee asked NCAA President Charlie Baker if there had been, and I quote, any assessment on the physical, physiological, and emotional harm of its transgender policies on female athletes. And President Charlie Baker's answer was no. That is a stunning admission. The NCAA is made up of hundreds of research institutions. They have spent tens of millions of dollars studying concussions, which largely benefits men's football, and yet in women's sports, the NCAA and its member schools have embarked on a program with evident harm to women without doing any research at all. Perhaps nothing could speak more clearly to the discrimination that is being practiced against women by the NCAA than the utter lack of research or evidence that supports their policies. Sadly, the NCAA president's admission is exactly right. In 2022, we as women were experimented upon by the NCAA and the Georgia Tech University, and we were never asked our opinion about being forced to compete against and forced to change clothes in a locker room with a male competitor. Women are still not being heard. It only takes a few minutes of searching to find numerous peer-reviewed scientific papers demonstrating that it is unfair for men to compete in women's to take performing-enhancing drugs without restriction. As I've already explained, Georgia Tech University also supported the NCAA's abdication of its Title IX responsibilities by willingly, but silently, changing their locker room policy. We were not told until we were using the locker rooms that a male competitor could use the women's locker rooms, and that there were therefore no women's locker rooms at the NCAA Women's Championships. The NCAA and Georgia Tech recklessly compromised the privacy of women athletes without even providing us an advance warning. Georgia Tech's lack of concern for women forced me to change in a storage closet. If these policies are not quickly changed, the ramification for future generations of women will certainly be even more severe. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and thank you all for considering what the Georgia legislature can do to protect the rights of women in sport.
Thank you, Kylie. Thank you for being here today. I forgot to mention this for the committee. We're going to hear from all of the ladies, and then we'll have time for the committee to ask questions. Before we do hear from Reka, though, I do want to recognize our Lieutenant Governor, who I mentioned earlier, formed this committee. I know you have another meeting, Governor, you need to get to, so if you'd like to step forward and share a few words from the podium.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, committee members, for being here and being involved in this committee. And I appreciate the testimony from these young ladies who have taken time out of their days to travel here to Georgia. And we greatly appreciate that, ladies. I know a lot of y'all came from, places like Kentucky and Illinois and other places to testify to your story. This is something we had an opportunity to address a few years ago, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman. I was still in the Senate at the time when this issue had been talked about and kicked around, and I thought it was an issue that we, as legislators at the time, had an opportunity to act on it, but we ended up punting the matter to the Georgia High School Association, and which I think is unfortunate, and I think it was the wrong move for us to do. However, we do have an opportunity to correct the misgivings from the past, and I think we should take that opportunity. But I appreciate having this committee to look at this issue one more time. I appreciate the ladies giving their testimony as student athletes, because I can tell you as a former student athlete that the blood, sweat, and tears that you put into being a student athlete is very is something that unless you've done it before yourself, there's no way to quite understand it, because it is a 7-day-a-week 24/7 job, really, quite frankly, but you do it for the love of the game. And this situation that we're in right now is not here. We're not here to marginalize any one group, but we're here to protect female sports, and we're here to protect female athletes. And that's what we should be doing as legislators. And I know that we're going to be able to do it at the high school level, because we're going to take those reins away with that obligation and away from the Georgia High School Association, because as elected officials, that should be our duties. And we're going to protect female sports to the state-run universities and public universities that we fund here in the state of Georgia. So I do appreciate you chairing this committee, Senator Dolezal, and I appreciate the committee members for being here. And this, like I said, this should not be a Republican or Democratic issue. Because it is, at the end of the day, it's about protecting female athletes. It's about protecting daughters, granddaughters, people who want to compete on a level playing field with athletes that are similar in scope and shape and their biology. And so I appreciate the opportunity to speak here. I wish I could hear the rest of the testimony, but I know it will be very informative because these ladies have been traveling all over the country to talk about the situation that they had to live through themselves. And we just appreciate them willing to share and appreciate everybody in attendance. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Governor. Appreciate you being here this morning. Next up, we have testimony from Reka George joining us online. Reka, just say good morning to all of us. We can make sure you have your microphone. I'll let you know that we have you. And then once we do that, the floor will be yours.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm here.
Good morning. Good to see you. All right. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Reka George. I'm an Olympian and a former college swimmer from Virginia Tech University. I competed for my home country of Hungary in the 2016 Olympic Games in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, in the 200-meter backstroke and in multiple European championships. After competing for Hungary in the Olympic Games, I came to Virginia Tech University to obtain my college degree and continue to compete in swimming. At Virginia Tech, I was a two-time ACC champion and a two-time NCAA Division I All-American. As an international student, I came to America to compete in the NCAA collegiate swimming because I wanted to train and compete with the best female athletes in the world. For many decades, the NCAA has been a light beckoning women from countries across the globe to seek a chance at glory and excellence that we cannot get back home. I was awarded a life-changing full academic scholarship and the chance to pursue my dream, but part of that dream, my dream of becoming an All-American in the 500-yard freestyle event at the fastest short course swim meet in the world, was suddenly washed away 2 years ago. On that day in the pool at Georgia Tech University, my dream became not just a bad dream, not just an on-field dream, but it really became a nightmare. This was a nightmare because what happened to me in a country that is known as the land of the free and the home of the brave is that I learned that even here in the home of the brave, some people are not willing to stand up for the rights of women. Instead, some are willing to allow men to take athletics achievements and opportunities from women for which we have worked hard our entire lives. Some of the NCAA and at Georgia Tech University are willing to authorize a man with full male genitalia to disrobe in front of a room full of women and to steal our safe spaces. And I realized that if this can happen here in the land of the free and the home of the brave, then what hope is there for women anywhere? If this can happen in the place I was thought was founded to be a shining city on the hill, how long will women anywhere in the world be free to achieve, to be safe, and to be women? What happened at the 2022 NCAA Division I Swimming and Diving National Championships at Georgia Tech University was unfair, it was degrading, and it made the harmful statement to women and girls everywhere that some believe women do not have in strict sport, that some believe women are not worth standing up for, indeed that some claim we do not even exist as a distinct sex separate from men. Through their actions, Georgia Tech and the NCAA said quite clearly to me that they regard me as no different than a man, and that if a man says he can take from me what he wants, I must give it to him. So today, in a country that I love but not where I was born, in a land where my native language is not much spoken, I must speak up for women, whatever the cost. I hope you will hear me more than just hear me. I hope you will act to stand up for women and for our rights. To protect women, I respectfully ask you to hold on to and not compromise a simple truth that you can find in any biological textbook. The female sex is a biological fact. This simple fact has several corollaries. The male sex is a biological fact. A man does not become a woman by demanding that he be called a woman. Sex is an immutable biological fact that cannot be changed. Second, may I humbly suggest that if one cannot accept the women are defined by their sex alone, they cannot ever hope to prevent discrimination against women. There is no objective definition for a woman other than a definition based on sex alone. And if you cannot define us, you cannot protect us. Women need protection because of our sex, because we are biologically different from men. One cannot effectively protect women if they consider our sex to be irrelevant. Month before the NCAA championship in 2022, I learned from social media that I would be forced to compete against a male swimmer in Georgia. The news spread quickly within the swimming community, but no one really said anything against it. Everyone was quiet and afraid to talk. Getting ready for the biggest swimming competition of the year, that will be my last college championships in my career, I was more than ready to do my best. I was ready to race. However, knowing that I would have to swim against a man in the 500 freestyle event was very hard mentally. I had never been in a situation like this before. I had never before in my life thought I would have to compete against a man. I compete in a sport that is drug tested, and one of the drugs that is tested for is testosterone. Testosterone is a hormone that male bodies produce in amounts 4 to 20 times higher than the body of a woman. Even more important, testosterone and male genes trigger developments in a man's body that women can never match and that give men enormous advantages in virtually every sport. How do I know this? Consider that Katie Ledecky, one of the greatest women swimmers ever, has the 19 fastest times in history in the women's 1500 meters. Every year, dozens of 14, 15 years old schoolboys swim faster than Katie Ledecky's fast time. Katie Ledecky is not a bad swimmer. She is one of the most technically proficient swimmers in the world. These boys are not better swimmers than Katie Ledecky. Rather, they are simply males, and the body development of a man, even from a young age, gives him unique, unsurmountable biological advantages in every sport contested at the NCAA Division I, Division II, and Division III levels. Allowing a man to compete against women in these sports cheats women, and it deprives women of equal opportunities to succeed in sport. Before 2022, I never had to prepare myself mentally to swimming competition against a man who is physically bigger and much stronger than I am. This isn't something you can realistically prepare for or compete with because it simply is not a fair match. I and everyone who knows anything about sport or who cared to think about it for more than 5 minutes knew one spot would be reserved for Lia Thomas in the 500 freestyle final. Seeing the videos of him swimming and seeing his times at dual meets, it was obvious to everyone who cared that no woman would be able to beat him in the 500 freestyle. Thomas' best event, but the event at which Thomas was only the 65th ranked male in college swimming when he competed on his college men's team. For months, thousands of people, including officials at Georgia Tech and at the NCAA, knew a male swimmer who had previously competed on the men's swimming team at UPenn was going to compete against the women at the national championships and was going to change clothes in the women's locker room. All these officials at the NCAA and Georgia Tech knew what was going to happen. If they cared to think about it, they knew what the women swimmers would be going through mentally and emotionally as we prepared to face our Goliath, someone who had such an enormous advantages that it would not be a fair fight. They knew it, but they didn't do nothing to stop it. They did nothing to protect women against the violation of our rights to equal opportunity, to fair competition, to bodily privacy, and to safe spaces. They put us in the position to have to fight Goliath, and then they turned their heads and looked the other way and said they could not prevent it. The truth is they did not have the courage to try to prevent it. I think it is critical that this committee not underestimate how important the NCAA Swimming and Diving National Championships is to women. I have swum in the Olympic Games, and the NCAA Championships is known to be the fast short course meet in the world. The depth of excellent swimmers is greater at the NCAA Championships than in the Olympic Games. This meet, my last college meet that was to be held at the Georgia Tech, was one of the most important events in the world for women swimmers. The NCAA Championships is not an easy meet to get into. Great swimmers may never qualify for the NCAA Championships. To qualify for the NCAA Championships, you are by definition a great swimmer. However, Lia Thomas never came too close to qualify for the NCAA Championships as a male swimmer. Thomas could only qualify to compete in the women NCAA Championships because of the enormous physical advantages he possessed as a man. Our coaches didn't say anything about this situation to the team until we got to Atlanta. I remember the first time I ran into Thomas. It was one day before the meet started. I was talking with one of my teammates on the pool deck in front of the locker room door. I opened the locker room door and was about to turn around and walk into the locker room to change when I physically bumped into Thomas. I was shocked by his size. He was about 6 feet 4 inches tall, and I was shocked that as he bumped into me, his male genitalia was touching my hand that was stuck between us as he was leaving the locker room. I couldn't even say sorry. I froze, and he just smiled at me and said sorry in a male voice. We did not even have a women's locker room for the NCAA Women's National Championships. I repeatedly looked over my shoulder the whole time while I was changing. I was terrified knowing he could walk in on me at any second as I changed into my swimsuit, and the private areas of my body would be exposed to this man, and my privacy and desire not to expose myself to a man unwillingly stripped from me. When we got back to the hotel with my team, I and many of the girls walked up to our coaches and asked them if they knew we were being forced to change in the same locker room as a man. They told us they would bring up this issue during their coaches' meeting later that day. A few hours later, our coach told us that several coaches asked the NCAA to give women a safe, private changing space, but the NCAA turned them down, that the NCAA will let Thomas change with the women, and we, women, just have to go with it. So I decided that for the rest of the meet, I would walk an extra 2 to 3 minutes and use a locker room outside of the competition pool area that was open to the public. Even in this public locker room, I still constantly feared that Thomas could walk in at any moment if he wanted to, because the NCAA's policy allowed him to do so. The locker room situation put great stress on me. I was not able to focus fully on my race or on going through my usual routine before my race. I spent much of my energy worrying about the possibility of exposing myself to a man who could enter the locker room at any minute. It held me back. I couldn't let this thought go, and I couldn't do my previous routine that I was used to. Everyone who has been an athlete knows that doing your best at race isn't only physical, but is mental as well. The knowledge that I was competing against a man was forced me 100-pound weight dragging me down before I even dove into the pool. On the second day of the championships, I swam the preliminary round of the 500 freestyle, and I finished 17th in the prelims, missing the finals by only 1 place because the NCAA allowed the male swimmer to compete in the women's race and replace me. After Thomas competed in the last preliminary, and I realized I would be watching my race from the pool deck instead of scoring valuable points for my team, all I could do was cry. With support from my coaches and teammates, I wrote a letter to the NCAA. I told them how heartbroken I was and how unfair are the rules that allow men to compete against women, not only for me, but for all the women at that meet. To this day, I had never received a response from the NCAA. My feelings as a woman were obviously not a priority. I was not even worthy of acknowledgement. I had thought that women in America had rights to be treated equally to men. But this experience taught me that for the NCAA and for Georgia Tech University, equal opportunities for women are an empty promise, something they claim to care about, but in practice they easily discard when a man says it will take him happy and fulfilled to compete against women and take their opportunities. After the 2022 national championships, I went back to school and had a lot of time to think about the situation. I know many who competed against Thomas are still afraid to speak up. Unfortunately, women are bullied and harassed if they speak up to defend women's spaces from male intrusion. The bullying can be especially bad on college campuses. But even though a man beat me in the pool, and even though I know some will criticize me and try to suppress my voice, I have decided I am going to fight this new and dangerous philosophy of stealing women's opportunities to give them to men. Despite what happened, there was never been an apology by the NCAA or by Georgia Tech. It has been nearly 2.5 years, almost 1,000 days, without an apology, without an indication that they are seeking to protect women. The discrimination against women practiced by the NCAA and Georgia Tech University has real and harmful consequences for women. These consequences go far beyond sport. Either sex means something or it doesn't. Either being a woman means something or it doesn't. The NCAA and Georgia Tech have, through their actions and policies, erased the meaning of the term woman, taking away the basis for the protection of women and devaluing women in the eyes of all who accept their faulty reasoning. I am proud to stand today with so many other young women who are seeking to expose the discrimination against women being practiced by the NCAA and Georgia Tech University. Our experience teaches that Georgia Tech University and the NCAA cannot be trusted to protect women. Please consider what you do to protect the rights of women. Thank you.
Thank you, Reiko. Are you going to be able to stay with us for questions at the end of all the testimony?
Yes, I will be here until the end.
Okay, great. Hang tight. We'll be back after the next couple of ladies testify.
All right, thank you.
Grace, yeah, thank you. Grace County, if you could step up. Good morning.
Good morning.
Once you get situated and once you do, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. My name is Grace County. I am a 22-time All-American, 12-time first-team All-American, 6-time UNC school record holder, Olympic trial semifinalist, and I am a Tar Heel. Thank you for allowing me to be here to tell my story. The 2021-2022 year was my senior season. I had not yet decided to utilize my 5th year of eligibility awarded due to COVID-19, so this was my last year competing in the NCAA championships. Showing up to the pool at 5:45 a.m., 4 days per week, having double practice days, lifting weights 4 times per week, and dedicating 24 hours per week to a sport that I had dedicated my entire life to was no question for me. I wanted to be the best, and I knew that I had to do everything I could to reach my goals. As the season went on, I was posting top times at dual meets, in practice, and moving more weight in the weight room than ever before. I knew that what I could control was being taken care of. I first heard about Lia Thomas in 2021 on a random weekday while sitting in a study hall on campus. I could not quite wrap my head around the concept of a male competing against women at a D1 collegiate level, but it was real and it was happening. After spending a few months trying to understand what was going on within our sport, the lack of fairness, the silence, and the lack of opposition to something that could clearly harm the trajectory of women's sports in a variety of aspects, it came to a point when I realized that nothing was going to happen. No one was saying anything regarding what Thomas participating in D1 athletics meant in terms of fairness, and everyone seemed to be in agreement with a male competing against women. And the domination by Thomas in competition at every dual meet, midseason, and any other competition was evident. So I was afraid to disagree. I was fearful that disagreeing with people would cause issues and chaos in my life, so I decided to push this reality away. As the championships grew closer, I kept seeing more blog posts, video footage, and place time comparisons of Thomas when he was competing against males and Thomas competing against females. Again, I thought something was going to be done by this point to protect the fairness of competition moving forward because it was evident from what I had learned in my university's biology course, growing up with 2 brothers who are stronger, faster than me, racing boys and men in club practices and at UNC practices, and after viewing the times and places comparisons being posted by Lia in competitions, that competing as a woman against Thomas was unfair. After the ACC conference meet, I recognized that the NCAA championship was the meet that I was going to be in peak shape for. My coaches did not give me the rest normally provided to swimmers to perform at their peak for ACCs because it was their philosophy too that the NCAAs was my main focus. I had the potential to score and place in all 3 of my individual events, and that is what our focus was on. Therefore, there was a significant amount of pressure I put on myself to perform at my highest level at that national meet. I would individually swim the 50 and 100 freestyle and 100 backstroke and compete in the 200 freestyle relay, 200 medley relay, 400 medley relay, and 400 freestyle relay. If I made it back to finals in all of my races, that would mean I would race 10 times throughout the span of 4 days. I continued training for the weeks leading up to the NCAAs and received word that Lia Thomas events were released publicly. Thomas was slated to compete in the 100 freestyle. When I found this out, I knew that I could not control this. I knew that everything I had been anticipating, dreading, and been anxious about the entire season was coming to fruition. The weight that this put on my shoulders increased the overall pressure of the competition. And as I mentioned before, everything was riding on this competition. And all I wanted to do was swim. As this competition went on, I watched Thomas compete and win the 500-yard freestyle and tie with Riley in the 200-yard freestyle. I was left in disbelief and thought to myself, why wasn't anybody doing anything? Finally, it came to the last day of competition, and I was to compete against Thomas in the 100 freestyle. I prepared in the morning like any other day of the meet, but I was angry. The additional weight of this day was intense. I swam in the morning and placed in the top 8 at the finals. Thomas placed in the top 8 as well. I looked at the psych sheet for finals, and I was to swim between 2 trans-identifying athletes. I went back to my hotel room and was unable to relax between prelims and finals. It was the last day of competition, and despite how exhausted I was restless. My mind was racing. Finally, it was time to return to the pool. I got into the pool and had my coach write me a warm-up so that I could just shut my brain off and swim, because that is what I had wanted to do the entire meet. It was 30 minutes before the race, and I was so overwhelmed, I called my mother and cried. This was the only time in my swimming career that I had ever cried before a race. The first time in my career that I wanted to give up at a meet that I had worked my entire life to get to, and my last individual event that I got a race for UNC. I remember leaving that phone call and getting into the pool, not to warm up, but to float. I did the rest of my pre-race routine, but my stomach hurt more than ever before. It was shaking, and I was too. I headed into the ready room and felt ill. My stomach was still shaking. I had intense acid reflux and was so nauseous I thought I was going to throw up. I was sitting in the ready room trying to convince myself that what I was going to experience was normal. We walk out for the race, and I am walking out next to Thomas. I pretend it is normal, but my body is numb. I get up to the blocks to swim. I dive in. I try to execute my race plan, but I black out during the race. I could not feel a thing. I touch the wall, and I see that I got 7th. Thomas got 8th. I get out of the pool and head to the award section. The 100 freestyle was not what I had wanted to or planned for the entire season, but I was so relieved that it was over. I could finally feel my stomach start to relax. Thank goodness the competition was over, but I soon realized that our week-long nightmare in Atlanta would not just fade away. The 2022 NCAA Women's Swimming and Diving Championships is destined to be remembered by many as the most anti-woman sporting event in history. I remember the weeks following the competition, it was still a conversation topic. Every time me competing against a male was brought up in my vicinity, I had to dismiss myself because I could still not wrap my head around the fact that the NCAA and Georgia Tech University had done nothing to protect the sport that I and so many other women trained their entire lives to compete in at the highest level. I did not want to spend any more of my time wrestling with that fact. I wanted to push it down and forget. The NCAA and Georgia Tech University did not hold a fair competition at the 2022 Women's Swimming NCAA Championships, and the detrimental impact this meet had on the trajectory of women's sports has been enormous. Rights that women had fought for just 2 generations before me were compromised by the NCAA and Georgia Tech University. I felt violated sharing a locker room with a male in front of whom I could be changing into a fast suit on average 3 times per day. That takes 15 to 30 minutes to get on. I did not consent to being naked and changing in front of a male. I do not feel that any of the women at the 2022 Division I NCAA Women's Swimming Championships had their wishes or preferences considered. What I thought was my final collegiate meet before taking my 5th year was diminished by an unfair competition and the unjust treatment of women. I just wanted to swim and do what I love, but that was taken from me. The hearings the Georgia Senate is conducting are not only important for myself and the other women to be able to share our stories, but also for the girls and women who will come after us. We have a right as women to have an equal and fair playing field. We have a right, like any other individual, to feel safe and protected in our environment. We have a right to have our voices heard. I want to help save the trajectory of women's sports for mine and everyone else's future daughters, granddaughters. And I want to ensure that women and girls do not have to experience what I and so many others experienced without our consent in the 2022 NCAA Championships at Georgia Tech University. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. And next up is Caitlin Wheeler. Caitlin, if you'll come forward. To get settled in there, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Senators. Thank you all so much for allowing us to be here and hearing our testimonies. My name is Caitlin Wheeler. I'm a recent graduate of the University of Kentucky, where I proudly competed as a member of the women's swim team alongside my teammate Riley Gaines. I was a full scholarship athlete at Kentucky, where I also was a multiple-time All-American and an NCAA qualifier and silver medalist, and an SEC team and relay champion. I made the academic honor roll during each of my 4 years in college and received a scholarship that allowed me to pursue a master's degree, which I completed this past May. I mention these accomplishments because none of them would have been possible without Title IX and without the women's sporting category. A fact that I believe is crucial to understand and highlight today. Without women's sports, I, like so many women, would not have had the opportunities to succeed in life that I now have. Part of the reason I'm here to testify is because the sport eligibility rules and policies of the National Collegiate Athletic Association, the NCAA, Georgia Tech University, and many other NCAA member colleges and universities are harming women in their future opportunities and threatening the opportunities of future generations, both in and out of sports. With that in mind, I'm here to share with you some of the most painful and demeaning experiences in my life, which took place at Georgia Tech University. It was November 2021 of my junior year when I found out. My journey as a collegiate athlete had been filled with challenges. It seemed that it every year brought a different major obstacle. Freshman year, the NCAA Women's Swimming and Diving Championships was canceled due to COVID just a day before we were set to leave. My sophomore year brought relentless COVID testing, mask mandates, contact tracing, isolation, making consistent training very difficult. At times, it felt nearly impossible. Yet, my teammates and I persevered like so many athletes across the country. We did our best, even though the weight of disappointment and the pandemic dread lingered over us. The college experience we had anticipated and had been promised when we were recruited seemed to be slipping through our fingers. My first 2 collegiate seasons were so hampered and reduced by the impact of the pandemic, I didn't think it could get any worse than it already was. Little did I know, in November of 2021, a new and different adversity was about to rip through the college swimming world. Overcoming adversity is nothing new to me. I've been doing it since I was a child. I started swimming at just 4 years old and fell in love with the water. It became my sanctuary, my escape from the world. When COVID struck, we adapted, we adjusted, we pressed on, thinking the worst was behind us. But as my junior year unfolded, a new and unexpected challenge emerged, one that shook me to my core, testing not just my strength as an athlete, but my very identity as a woman and female competitor. In 2021, Leah Thomas was a name I'd never heard before. That was until we read through the national rankings that provided a benchmark for where we stood as we began to prepare for the NCAA championships, which would occur in March of the coming semester. In those rankings, the name Leah Thomas stood out, not just because I'd never heard it before, but because in event after event, that name topped the list, far surpassing even the second place swimmers. At the time, we believed this was just another female athlete who had unexpectedly emerged their senior year. However, an article soon revealed the truth. Leah Thomas was a male who had previously competed on the University of Pennsylvania men's swim team. The fact that this man could be included in the rankings of female swimmers went against everything I knew about fairness in my sport. Men have inherent advantages that women cannot match. They are taller, they have leaner muscle mass, they have greater lung capacity, and due to the innumerable physical advantages, their swimming times are much faster than those of women at virtually every level in our sport, starting even before puberty. We all knew that even mediocre male swimmers could beat the best female swimmers. It simply was not a fair contest. Yet this man, formerly Will Thomas, now rebranded as Leah Thomas, was being allowed to compete against and was being ranked nationally against the women. I literally wondered, what is the world coming to? And I knew instinctively and immediately this would be an even greater challenge to women's sports than the pandemic had been. This wasn't just a betrayal to the girls on the University of Pennsylvania swim team. It was a slap in the face to every woman who had dedicated her entire life to her sport. It meant that unless somebody did something soon, my junior year would be just as diminished as COVID had made my freshman and sophomore seasons. When I first learned of this possibility that a man would be allowed to compete at our women's NCAA meet, I felt utterly defeated. But what shook me the most was the realization that our dreams, our hard work, were being trampled by an organization made up of colleges and universities institution that all have biology departments or at least access to experts in human biology and sport performance, these institutions should be led by people who understand unfairness of allowing a man to compete against women. Yet, despite having the capacity to exercise reason, they were willing to sacrifice the fairness and integrity of women's sports, something countless women before us had fought tirelessly to protect for decades. In an instant, the NCAA and its member institutions were turning back the clock over half a century on opportunities for women in sports. The question kept coming back to me, why? I could spend hours describing the dedication, sacrifices, and relentless effort it takes to compete at the highest level in swimming, but I believe you already know this. I am certain that every coach, official, administrator, and university president knew in their core that the NCAA policy allowing a man to compete against women in college sports was wrong. Yet, they all stood by and watched our years of hard work, blood, sweat, and tears were erased, forcing us to affirm the identity and feelings of a man, regardless of the personal cost to each one of us. Of course, I hoped the Georgia Tech University, the host of the NCAA championships, would intervene on our behalf and stop the insanity. However, I learned that the Georgia Tech not only failed to intervene, but it also unknowingly and intentionally increased our humiliation and pain. In an even more shocking and harmful betrayal with no warning, Georgia Tech University and the NCAA allowed Leah Thomas to use the locker room, forcing us to undress in front of a man with fully intact male genitalia. I first discovered that a man was being allowed to use the women's locker room the day before the meet started by seeing it firsthand. I was in the locker room changing out of my practice suit into my racing suit for a stinger, a pre-meet race. Suddenly, the usual buzz of conversation in the locker room noticeably shifted to one of discomfort, awkwardness, and fear. I turned around, exposed and bare, while still inching up my racing suit, only to see a very large 6'4" man just 10 feet from me. I realized it was Leah Thomas. I was completely shocked and caught off guard. I immediately reached for my towel. He put his belongings down near me and proceeded to pull down his pants and begin changing in front of me. I was stuck in the most uncomfortable position of my life, with only half my racing suit pulled up in the presence of a naked man. This felt far from a normal experience. It felt extremely wrong. I glanced around at the other girls and saw they too were covering themselves, trying to huddle on the opposite side of the locker room as far away from Thomas as they could get in that small space. I returned to inching up my racing suit up my torso as quickly as I could manage. As soon as I could, I left the locker room, still in shock of what I had just witnessed, with every fiber of my being crying out in mental torment and humiliation. I've never felt more violated and betrayed than I did at that moment. I was betrayed by the Georgia Tech University, a public university that chose to not stand for hundreds of college women across the country and allowed a man to violate our personal privacy by disrobing right in front of us. I was betrayed by the NCAA, an organization that was supposed to be dedicated to fairness, safety, and equal opportunity in college sports, an organization that should have protected us. Title IX, enacted 50 years prior to the meet, designed precisely for moments like I faced, was ironically being celebrated at that very same swim meet where I experienced the most humiliating moment of my life, when my personal privacy was stripped from me without my consent. The questions kept coming back to me. How and why would Georgia Tech and the NCAA allow such injustice? It was then when I realized the harsh truth. The people at the NCAA and Georgia Tech who made the decisions do not care about fairness. They do not care about protecting women, and they do not care about equal opportunity. If they did, they would have stood up and never allowed a man to take away trophies, honors, and titles. They would have never allowed a man to invade our areas of privacy, our safe spaces. As I prepared for one of the biggest meets of my career, my competitive focus was overwhelmed. I knew that at any time I had to change into my practice suit, my racing suit, or even just use the restroom, a man could walk in on me at any moment. This disrupted my mental and physical preparation, so I resorted to timing my visits to the locker room, ensuring that Thomas had already changed and left. This is something that I should have never been allowed to happen. It forced me to confront the reality that to those making the decisions at the NCAA and Georgia Tech, my feelings, my privacy, and my well-being did not matter. I have experienced firsthand the devastating consequences of anti-women policies in inaction, and I'm here because I cannot stand by and watch it continue to happen to other women and girls. And I believe I speak for all the athletes testifying today when I say that we don't want to have to be here. We shouldn't have to be the ones insisting that the NCAA and Georgia Tech University be held on their duty to treat women fairly and with dignity. This responsibility should not be on our shoulders. But here we are because the leaders of the NCAA and Georgia Tech University lack the courage to defend the rights of women. Years ago, we should have received an apology for what happened during the 2022 NCAA championships at Georgia Tech University. However, just as we were during the days of those championships, today we are still being ignored. I look around this room and I see no one from the Georgia Tech University here to take responsibility for their failures. Did the Georgia Tech University and its president not know that 5 young women who were harmed by their reprehensible choices would be here to testify today? Where is the president of the Georgia Tech University? Where is the Georgia Tech University athletic director? Do they uncaringly allow men to shower with their daughters? Do they fail to tell their own daughters that they have given a man access to her safe spaces? Why did they put me in a position where I was unwillingly required to undress in front of a man? These are my questions, but please understand this isn't just about us. It's about the young girls who dream of greatness and the future generations of female athletes. That's who we're fighting, or even the president of the NCAA. Our message is clear. If you are unwilling to stand up for the rights of women, you should step aside and let someone with the courage to make the right decision take your place. I sincerely hope that before this committee's hearings conclude, the Georgia Tech president testifies heck. I also hope you find a way to bring about meaningful change at Georgia Tech as well as in all Georgia colleges, Tech. I also hope you find a way to bring about meaningful change at Georgia Tech as well as in all Georgia colleges, universities, high schools, and elementary schools. Committee's hearings
Please
conclude
protect
with the
women.
courage to make
Please
the right
protect
decision,
women's
take your
sports.
place. Protect them from the humiliation and experiences that I and so many other women endured in Georgia at our national championships. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Caitlin. Next up is Riley Gaines. Riley, if you'll step forward, and as soon as you have a chance to be seated and comfortable, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, or good morning, I guess, honorable committee. I have known these girls for a long time. We've known each other far longer than this issue has arisen. But in these past 2 years or so, I have been able to listen to them more in depth, a deeper account of what we went through. We've been able to converse, share similarities of how we felt, share differences of how we felt. But I cannot, I feel so frustrated. That's how I feel. I feel frustrated. I feel betrayed. I feel heartbroken. I feel demoralized that we have to be here. You just heard from 4 witnesses here today. There are hundreds of others. I actually prepared a testimony to read. Again, many similarities in regards to our feelings, some differences in our racing. The difference where I swam against Thomas, we actually tied. The NCAA denied me my trophy because, and I appreciate their honesty, they admitted that when they'd been advised that when photos are being taken, it was crucial that the trophy was in Thomas's hands, ultimately reducing everything we had all worked for our entire lives down to a photo op. And I would be very happy to answer questions about anything. My testimony at this point is well documented. But I wrote a letter, actually, to the President Cabrera of Georgia Tech. I was hoping to today see him and privately and personally hand him this letter. This is never something that I wanted to air publicly, but he's not here. He didn't have the gumption to show up here. So I decided, rather than reading a testimony that was prepared, I'm just going to read the letter to President Cabrera. Dear President Cabrera, there is one question that has come back to me over and over again over the last 2 years since I visited your campus as a 21-year-old college student in 2022. Why didn't you protect me? There are images in my mind that I can't erase. I wish that I could erase these images that day after day make me feel less safe as a woman. They repeat in my mind late at night when I'm alone, when I'm walking a city street by myself at night, whenever I feel vulnerable. Those images come back, and the same question comes to my mind. Why didn't you protect me? Dr. Cabrera, of all people, you could have protected me. Not only are you the powerful president of Georgia Tech University, you understand biology and science. You're on the board of the National Geographic Society. You're a world-renowned scholar and a man of global influence, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. You've won awards from the World Economic Forum and served on the board of a Federal Reserve Bank. You, of all people, could have protected me and more than 300 young women like me who came to your campus for one of the most significant meets of our lives. You could have protected us, but you did not, and I frequently ask myself why. Dr. Cabrera, do you have a daughter? You knew that a 6'4", fully intact man was coming to compete against me, my teammates, and my competitors at the 2022 NCAA Division I Women's Swimming and Diving National Championships. You could have stopped it. You could have at least said, not here, not on this campus of Georgia Tech, but you did not. You had the chance at the inception to bring a sane, rational, science-based perspective to the protection of single-sex spaces in sports, but you looked the other way, and you did nothing. Why didn't you intervene? The scientific evidence for immense male performance advantages in sport is overwhelming. I don't have to explain that to you or to this committee for that matter. But you ignored the science at the expense of women. Your Georgia Tech University officials knew a naked adult man with full male genitalia was being authorized by Georgia Tech to share a locker room with hundreds of college-age women who would themselves be naked, unable to hide, unable to protect our privacy. This was intentional, this was premeditated, it was sexual harassment, and it happened right here in the capital city of the state of Georgia, just a few blocks away from where I read this letter. Let me be clear. I label this as sexual harassment because me and the 4 witnesses you heard from today and the hundreds of other 18 to 22-year-old college girls were not asked for our consent, and we did not give our consent to being exploited and exposed to a 6'4" fully naked man. Because you did nothing. That man walked into our women's locker room at your university and saw me undressed down to full nudity. I didn't even know he had access to our locker room until I heard a man's voice and turned around and saw him a few feet in front of me, naked, inches away from where I was simultaneously unclothed. You allowed college women to be traumatized and violated on your campus in this way. Why didn't you protect us? Don't you understand how important sport is to women? Don't you understand that to get to the NCAA championships, we devote our blood, sweat, and tears for years, training to shave merely hundredths of a second off of our time for a shot at being an All-American or a national champion? Personally, I think you do understand these things, but for some reason, they weren't important to you. Inclusivity mattered more than safety or fairness, or I should say safety and fairness. We'd already been robbed of an NCAA championships, as you heard, in 2020 because of COVID. The best collegiate female swimmers and divers, the best in the world, came to Georgia Tech University in 2022, and you, hand in hand with the NCAA, the IOC, and USA Swimming, made us the victims of harassment and discrimination. You made us the victims of a cruel, traumatizing psychological experiment that pretends that it's fair and just and compassionate for a man to take from woman, that pretends it is normal for a man to be given access to a woman's safe spaces, and that requires women to accept it all without saying anything lest they hurt the feelings of a man. Ignore the threat of men, ladies. Don't worry if a guy follows you into the bathroom. Abandon your instincts that something is off. Loosen your boundaries, stay quiet, and take your pants off anyways. That's the message that we receive from you, Dr. Cabrera. I don't understand why you, an educated, powerful man, a man who gives lip service to protecting the rights of women, still support the same perverse policies that allowed this to happen. It's been more than 2 years, and you've offered no public or private apology from Georgia Tech or on behalf of yourself. Dr. Cabrera, when I agreed to testify before this committee, I understood that you would also be invited to testify.
I thought then that by coming to testify, I would at least get an answer to my question of why didn't you protect me? But I'm here, and you have declined to testify. Not only that, but I understand that Georgia Tech, under your leadership, is resisting providing to this committee even your university's written communications with the NCAA. So I have a new question for you. President Cabrera, what are you hiding? Do you tell parents who are sending their 17-year-old daughters off to your college that the policies you have in place favor the naked man in their locker room as opposed to their daughters? That their daughters could be reprimanded if they oppose or even dare to question out loud these policies? Dr. Cabrera, I don't want any more young girls to have to ask the heartbroken, despairing questions that we have had to ask for 2 years since that national championship. But until there is change, we will keep asking these questions until I have an answer and until Georgia Tech and the NCAA adopt policies that are safe and fair to everyone. With all due respect, Dr. Cabrera, I believe I'm entitled to an answer to my questions. Not actually just me, but we all are. The witness is here, my younger sister, who is an elite level gymnast, my potential future daughter. I was a 21-year-old college student when I came to your campus in 2022. As Caitlin said, we didn't choose to be here. We don't want to be here. It's not the preferred path for my life to relive over and over what happened on your campus, on your watch. No, I'd much rather be in dental school where I was before all this, but I could not be silent. I spoke out in 2022, not sure of the support that I would receive, but as I speak here today, I can tell you that there is a growing wave of both men and women who will not be muzzled. And they're looking to you, Dr. Cabrera, wondering what you will say. The world watches and we await your response. The arrows that we've taken, the emotional toll, the backlash, it will all be worth it one day if little girls and young women in Georgia and throughout the country no longer have reason to ask the painful questions still reverberating in my mind. President Cabrera, why didn't you protect me? Dr. Cabrera, do you believe what happened at Georgia Tech University in 2022 can lead to something positive for women? I and those testifying with me today believe that the course can be corrected, and we speak for thousands of girls in this country, including many who competed at that 2022 NCAA championships at Georgia Tech. Will you give these young women hope? Will you move past the mistakes of the past to take a bold stand for women, for common sense, for fairness, for science today? Will you have the courage to break ranks with those who are knowingly shaming and hurting accomplished women who deserve much more than the silence and apathy we've received from the NCAA and 1,000 college administrators for the past 2 years? What happened here in 2022 was a bitter pill, but the story's not over. That difficult moment for Georgia Tech and for women's sports can be corrected for the future generation of women and girls. Dr. Cabrera, will you testify before this committee and speak out against the NCAA's anti-woman, anti-reality policies? Will you provide a shining example to other college presidents and embrace equal opportunities for everyone by resolving that eligibility in women's collegiate sports must be based on biological sex alone? President Cabrera, if you want to protect women in college sports today, you can take a pivotal step towards a more just future for women and for humanity. Thousands of women across this country and hundreds of girls who dream of swimming for the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets and more broadly who dream of competing in sports at all look forward to your response. Thank you. I, speaking for myself personally, would be happy to take questions whenever.
Thank you, Riley. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and invite the 3 other ladies who are here to come forward. You guys can put your name cards down in front of, grab a seat. And then Reka, I believe you're still with us online. I'm going to ask the staff here, Sydney, if we can unmute Reka's mic on our end. And then Reka, if you want to answer a question, feel free to unmute your mic on your end and just jump in. I won't have a great way to see you if you raise your hand or do anything else. So just feel free to participate and answer any of these questions that you would like to. I'm going to ask a couple of questions and I'm going to open it up to the committee to do the same thing. And I'm going to go ahead and unmute all of your mics because it's going to be easier for me to do that than to try to follow along. First of all, thank you all for testifying. Thank you all for being here today. Had a chance to talk to you guys before we walked in the room today, and I believe that all of you, it's not going to work to do this, so we have to do it manually. I believe that all of you have graduated and are all out working in the real world, if you will, and have taken time away from your jobs to be here. So thank you for doing that, Reka. Thank you for joining us online. I understand you're working in the athletic department at Virginia Tech, and maybe at some point you'll see the light and come down to the SEC and join us down here in the South. The invitation's open. I want to maybe start by understanding a little bit, if I'm imagining the trajectory of an All-American. Grace, I think you said you're a 22-time All-American. I'm guessing you start swimming at a young age. You're competing at a high level, probably by middle school. Certainly by high school, you're competing at a very high level, probably being recruited and acutely aware of the other high-level athletes in your sport. So help me understand when, and anybody can take this, when you first became aware of Lia Thomas. I think all of you said that it was sometime in the fall of 2021. What was kind of the genesis of that? You started seeing times that were posted online, and then what was kind of the process from which then you realized that Lia Thomas would be competing in the national championship?
So me personally, my junior year, I ended up placing 7th in the nation in my 200 freestyle. So it was really right then and there that I set a goal to win a national title for my senior year. And so senior year rolls around. And about midway through my senior season, so about November of 2021, I'm right on pace to achieve this goal. I was ranked 3rd in the nation, trailing the girl, and second, a girl I knew very well, because like in most sports, your top tier athletes know of each other regardless of where you compete because you'd grown up competing against each other, trailing her by a few 100ths of a second. But the name that was leading the nation was a name that me and my teammates had never heard of before. And this is the first time we became aware of a swimmer named Lia Thomas. We hadn't seen a photo of this person, or else things probably would have been a little more clear. But for all we knew at the time, this was a senior, which is bizarre. No one just swimming. Most of the time for women, especially, you peak at a younger age. So a senior coming out of nowhere from University of Pennsylvania, which is not a school that has ever historically produced that caliber of swimmer, leading the nation again by body lengths and events ranging from the 100 freestyle, which is a sprint, and all of the freestyle events in between through the mile, which is long distance. And so for those who might not necessarily understand swimming, think about that last piece in terms of your Olympic runners, because that's like saying your best 200-meter runner is your best marathon runner. It doesn't happen. Those are two totally different systems, but that's what we were seeing in this person. None of it made sense. I'm talking to my coaches. My coaches, they saw how hard I worked day in and day out. They knew the goals that I had set for myself. Who is this person? We had no idea. Talking to my teammates, same. And we continued to stay in the dark until an article was posted disclosing, and I remember word for word, and a blip of a sentence as if we were supposed to just read right over it. This article says, Lia Thomas is formerly Will Thomas and swam 3 years on the men's team at University of Pennsylvania before deciding to switch to the women's team. How I felt in that moment was immense relief. I looked at the situation and I thought, oh, this person's not a threat to my national title that I hope to win because he's a man. There's no way that the NCAA will let this person compete with us. I was looking up the name Will Thomas at this point, looking up where he ranked amongst the men in his rightful category, to which you heard he was 65th in the 500. The event that I would compete against him, he was ranked in the 400s nationally. There was no way the NCAA would allow this. But lo and behold, about 3 weeks before our national championships in March of 2022, the NCAA released a statement saying that Thomas's participation in the women's category was a non-negotiable, meaning there was nothing that we could do. There was no questions we could ask. There were no concerns that we could raise. We were quite literally told by our universities that we had to accept this with a smile on our face. So that's how I personally found out who Lia Thomas was.
For all of you, let's fast forward to that time frame, that 3 weeks before. Tell me about conversations that were happening on your team. Specifically, how were you informed by coaches? What was the dialogue with coaches, officials, athletic directors, trainers? You said that you were told to accept it with a smile on your face. I'm curious what level of freedom or lack of freedom you were given to express emotionally what that did for you, to ask questions, to come out publicly, obviously have come out publicly since then. I'm curious what was communicated to you guys either around scholarships or anything like that prior to that, and that'd be an open question for any of y'all.
I think we all have unique answers because we went to different schools, but I can attest to what we went through at Kentucky, where we had an outside professional, whatever that means, come in and sit us down, me, a 21-year-old senior in college at the time, and she taught us how to use she, her pronouns. She told us that we were not allowed to talk to media. Any media opportunities, we had to forward them to her. She would decline them on our behalf. We were told, you know, you want to get a job after college, don't you? No, if you speak up about this, your employer, they're going to look you up and they're going to see that you're a transphobe, and you don't want that. Riley, you know, you want to go to dental school. Well, no grad school will accept you if they see that you've spoken about this. They said you'll lose your friends. They said you'll lose your scholarship. I remember specifically my university said, Riley, oh yeah, and speaking of that scholarship, remember you signed that. And when you signed that, you gave away your rights to speak in your own personal capacity. Remember who you represent. Remember whose name is across your chest and across your cap, because it's not yours, it's ours. And understand we have already taken your stand for you. We could speak to the silencing effects, what I would call the emotional blackmail that we went through, what Thomas's teammates went through, which we're fortunate we only had to compete against him for one meet. What his teammates went through, they had to undress in front of him 18 times every single week. And I know that number because the girls counted it. That's how traumatized they were. When they sent an email, 16 of his teammates, to the administration expressing their discomfort in the locker room, the university responded back with, if you feel uncomfortable seeing male genitalia, here's some counseling resources that you should seek in an attempt to re-educate yourselves. And of course, counseling resources provided by none other than the LGBTQ Education Center on campus. I could speak to the silencing for literally hours, and they might have different experiences, but.
Do any of y'all
Yeah,
wanna-
I have, sorry to interrupt, but I have totally different experience than the other girls, I believe, because none of our coaches said anything to us until we got to the meet in Atlanta. And you know, like, we obviously read the news on social media and the team was talking about, but we were afraid to walk up to our coach and ask, like, what's gonna happen? Do we have to race with the male? Do we have to change with the male in the locker room? No one really knew what happened. We were just hoping that the NCAA will stand up and, you know, like, not gonna let Thomas change and compete against us at the meet. And when we got to the meet, I got 17th, and that was the point when my coach came up to me and told me that, okay, Rika, if you want to say something, this is the moment, this is the time. And I had a couple days, you know, like, I still tried to focus on my other events other than the 500 freestyle because it was in the past. And I just decided that nobody said a word about Thomas changing in the locker room or competing with the women's. And what if I say something? I wrote a letter, which I gave to an NCAA representative at the NCAA championships on the last day finals. And when I left Atlanta, the following day I shared it on social media, because my coach and our athletic director supported me to doing this. I had no idea that 2 years later we are gonna be still here, you know? So it was totally different than for the girls because they were told not to say anything. Where at the meet I was told by my coach that, okay, if I want to say something, this is the right time to do it.
And
I
Rika,
had that support what the girls didn't have.
from your testimony, do I understand correctly that you roll into the national championships, you're not aware of the locker room situation, you become aware of the locker room situation, you approach your coach and express your discomfort, and did you say that your coach then went to the NCAA seeking some sort of solution for you, and they came back and essentially told you this is the way it's going to be?
That's correct. So before every single meet, they have a coaches meeting. And they had this coaches meeting. My coach and other coaches from different universities brought up this issue that girls are changing with a male in the locker room. What could be a solution for this? And the NCAA told the coaches that we women just have to go with it. We don't have a chance to go elsewhere, or they don't give a different opportunity or space for Thomas to change separately from the woman. We were forced to be there with him.
I want to come
but
back.
coaches were not informed before the meet.
I want to come back to locker rooms in a second. Before I do that, somebody mentioned that boys and girls have different swim times even prior to puberty. I'm going to assume, and I want you guys to put some color around this. How much does that, do those two in parallel lines expand out as you get older? And help me understand, we all just got done watching the Olympics, so swimming is fresh on a lot of our minds. We probably know more about swimming than we have. But at the highest levels, this comes down to hundredths of a second, which I find it so interesting that you said that, or somebody said that you tied Thomas in a race, which I would assume is a very, very rare occurrence when you're timing to the hundredth of a second. What are the timing differences that you see that emerge at a young age, and then what are the time differences that emerge at the high levels between? Just grab a 100 free as an example. How disparate are those times? If you were to put and I think that Rika, you mentioned Katie Ledecky and the fact that she's a 19 time. I think the top 19 best times in the world are held by the same person. But I believe that you said that 14 and 15-year-old boys beat that time every year. So talk to me a little bit about what you all see in terms of the difference in times between boys and girls, men and women going through the competition.
Yeah, so I've been.
Give me 1 second to turn your mic on. You're number 12, I think. Okay.
So I learned to swim when I was about 7 and really took the sport seriously,
19
probably
time. I
from
think
the
the
age
top
14 and
19.
up. And from that point, it was pretty clear that boys were advantaged and they had drastically different times. It was significant then, but it was even more significant when I went to college. So as I said before, when I was done swimming last year in 2023, I was the most decorated female swimmer that had ever gone through NC State swimming team. And I would not have been able to even walk on like any Division I or Division II men's swimming team, like in my best races. It's not even close. You can't even compare it. Yeah. So, and it starts at young ages too, 14,
helpful.
15.
Grace.
For me, I grew up with two brothers, one of which swam competitively. We were like 2 years apart. I remember distinctly in high school, puberty ages, I was swimming the 50 backstroke and my best time was around a 26, I believe, ballpark. And around that same age, he was going around a 22 second 50-yard backstroke. And in a 50, like you train an entire year just to drop 0.1 or 0.05. And that is just what you're going to get at the end of the year. So having a, 4 or 5 second difference at the same age, that just goes to show like there is an enormous amount of difference in just muscle mass and everything, just biologically.
Caitlin.
So I started swimming when I was 4. I started swimming competitively when I was 8. And ever since a young age, I practiced with the boys. I was one of the top females on my club team. So in order to have people to push me, I practiced with the boys. And so growing up, swimming with them in practice, hitting puberty, even before puberty, they were easily able to outswim me. They weren't always as consistent as I was. I was a very driven athlete. I came to practice every single day, had to have that 100% practice attendance. And they didn't always have that same commitment, yet they could still come in and kick my butt any day of the week. And that only grew even as we got older. That gap, they could outswim me any day of the week. In college, it's not even comparable. They could take a whole year off of swimming and still come back, me being in the best shape of my life, and still beat us. I think in the case of Thomas, it's important to note, he swam 3 years on the men's team, took a whole year off during COVID, came back to swim on the women's swim team and was still dominating at the women's swim meet. So I think that goes to show too, he didn't have to be consistent with his training. He didn't have to be in the best shape of his life to still be dominating the best female athletes, the phenoms of the sport at the highest national championship meet in the world.
And during that year that Thomas took off, as I understand, there was also hormone therapy that happened there. Help me understand what disadvantage that would put Thomas at relative to competing as a male? And in your opinion, does that level the playing field to which that year or 2 or 3 of, I'm not sure how many years it was, of hormone, there's different reports I've seen, of hormone therapy may have leveled the playing field?
Yeah, so according to the NCAA rules, he had to fall within a certain testosterone threshold, which this threshold was like, I think 10 nanomoles per liter. They had to fall beneath that, which, to put that into perspective, is 5 times higher than the highest possible threshold that a female can produce naturally without doping. So that's not to say that that is like the only factor that differentiates men between women. There's so many other physiological factors, as we mentioned, lung capacity, bone density, all these other physiological factors that go into play. So to reduce women down to a testosterone threshold is frankly insulting and doesn't, equivalent a man to a woman, especially in sports.
You mentioned that one of y'all mentioned that you guys are tested for doping. Is that accurate? Is testosterone, any sort of testosterone producing drug, illegal for you to take in the NCAA as a female?
The NCAA has
Let me get you live there. There you go.
The NCAA has banned Celsius, the energy drink. So yes, we are not allowed to take testosterone. We are not allowed to take any performance enhancing drugs. They regulate caffeine intake because they consider that a performance enhancing drug. So yes, it is a banned substance.
Okay. I do want to talk about the locker rooms, and Sydney, if you can put the first graphic up. One thing that I did receive from Georgia Tech, in the response to our letter, and I'll wait for her to get this live so that we can all look at it together. I'll set this up, but there's a bid document that we got, and in the bid document, it looks like it was a form that was filled out online. It looks like it was filled out in October of 2021. And part of what we have here is the deck map. Do we have access to that, or should I come back to it, Sydney? You can go ahead and put that up. And this is the first deck map that was part of the bid map. And what it's going to show in the bottom left in gold, you'll see 2 separate locker rooms. And there's a notation here. I'll wait for you, Sydney. I'll just talk about it, and then we can I'll point it out again. There's 2 locker rooms. You guys are probably familiar with those. I understand from your testimony earlier that that typically during women's competition, both locker rooms be used for women, and that's what's noted here. So it's got 2 locker rooms noted, and on the Georgia Tech bid that they sent to the NCAA, it says women's weeks women's, men's week men's, and it says that for both locker rooms. There's a separate area in the bottom right that is purple that I'll show you when she gets this up, that says NCAA use. And then next to the NCAA use, there's women's public restrooms and men's public restrooms. So if you look right there below the pool, bottom left, you see locker room, women's week women's, men's week men's. Locker room next to that, women's week women's, men's week men's. If you look all the way down next to the men's and women's public restroom on the far bottom right of the map, you'll see that purple area says NCAA use. And then next to it are the women's public restrooms and the men's public restrooms, also locker rooms and showers. I was also given from Georgia Tech what I understand, can we go to the next graphic, which is the actual deck map for the event. And what we'll see that changes here between October, and was this event in March, is that correct, the championship? So between October and March, Sydney, if we can put the next graphic up, the locker room, women's week women's, men's week men's has changed to participant locker room for both. The NCAA use that's in purple on the new map is changed to participant unisex locker room. And then the restrooms, interestingly enough, remained women's and men's restrooms. So what I believe happened sometime between October and March in the midst of the other changes, I think you said it was 3 weeks out that you just discovered Thomas would be participating, is the women's locker rooms were changed to, quote, participant locker rooms. They changed the NCAA use area that's in purple to participant unisex locker room. So what I'm very curious about, A, were you all ever told that there was a unisex locker room that was designated separately from these participant locker rooms that was next to these restrooms?
No, we had no idea about the locker room situation, what that was going to look like until we were undressing next to this man. And so I pretty immediately, first to just further set the scene, when this was made clear that this was what the situation was, it was inherent for every girl in that changing space to cover themselves, whether it was with their hand or their clothes or their towel, and to get out of the locker room as quickly as they could. And I was one of those as well. And so I left the locker room, and immediately, before making it back to my bleachers, anything, I went up to one of the officials in the pool deck and I asked him, point blank, I said, look, what are the guidelines that allowed a man in our locker rooms? Forget the competition. I know the NCAA's policy there, but I'm talking specifically about the women's locker room. And so nonchalantly, I will never forget, this official responded back to me. He said, oh, we actually got around this by making the locker rooms unisex. I said, well, first and foremost, you realize by admitting that you had to change the locker rooms, you're admitting Thomas isn't a woman, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't have had to change the locker rooms. So thank you, I guess, partially for your admittance. But secondly, unisex, there's no place. There's no, coaches, parents, to be totally frank, not saying this is what Thomas is, but it allowed for any pervert who wanted to use that locker room to have full access without even bare minimum forewarning us that that was the arrangement. So that's how I found out. And my understanding was every locker room was unisex. We were told after this point, when we continued to press, that there was no space that we had access to that Thomas did not have access to.
Yeah, so when I look one, I noticed that this is the only document, the first document that Tech submitted did not have the NCAA logo on it. One thing that this committee needs to know from Georgia Tech is what happened between October and March, such that Tech seemingly deemed to designate these locker rooms for women. They did not have a unisex locker room designation. It would seem to have been taking the competition side of it aside, but as it relates to the locker rooms, perhaps a solution would have been to dedicate this purple locker room as the sole unisex locker room and not make y'all's locker room also a unisex locker room. But there isn't, the irony is not lost on me that right next to that is the women's public restroom and the men's public restroom, which were not made unisex for this event. So you guys were placed under a different set of guidelines than every single person who walked through the gate and paid a ticket, and that they had privacy in locker rooms should they wish to use the men's or women locker room, restroom, or showers. Whereas you all were not given that same privacy by the NCAA and Georgia Tech. And this committee needs to understand if that was a dictate from the NCAA, what the conversations were between the NCAA and Georgia Tech as it relates to this specific issue, because something changed. So I just want to clarify, Riley, they told you that your locker room was unisex. So both these locker rooms that you were using, and were you even aware that this other purple unisex locker room existed?
No, I'm picturing the pool. I've swam at Georgia Tech many times. I'm picturing the layout of the pool. I don't even know what that area is. I see the ready room. I don't even know really where that area was. We were never made aware that was even a space, an option for us. So the only locker rooms that I knew were available were the ones that say participant, which there were no men at this meet other than Thomas, of course. There were no men. It was a women's only national championship. And so they converted, as you see here, the men's locker room to a women's locker room. So we had access to both what would be labeled on the outside as men and women's. But those were the only locker rooms, to my knowledge, that we had access to.
Okay. I want to get back to this, what I'm at least going to term compelled speech. It sounds like you were told what to say or not say. Were you all, when you received media requests, did I understand you accurately, you were to refer those to the university and then the university denied those media requests?
Yes.
What was the posture, and remind me again who it was that came in and had the original conversation, at least with Kentucky, and talked to you guys about the pronouns and the other language that you were to use?
So that was our sports information director at the university. She came in and sat us down. It was only the girls who were competing directly against Thomas. So if you were going to NCAA's but not swimming freestyle, you didn't have to come to this training. Keep in mind, we had never had to do, we all in this committee know that swimming is not a sport that typically garners a lot of media attention, bar the Olympics. And so we had never had to go through media training, none of that. except for this meet, and only the girls who were racing against Thomas. She sat us down, conducted, it was like an interview type scenario. We had to answer the mock interview questions to her standard, or else we had to keep going through the training.
Give me an example of what a question was. That you had.
She would phrase a question pretty specifically at me, because my university was confident that I would make top 8. They were confident that Thomas would make top 8, and so she would ask me, if you happen to win a national title, we're going to ask you this question, whatever the question was. She would tell me I either was not allowed to use pronouns at all, or I had to refer to Thomas as a she. And that was the extent of what we could do on media. There was no outside media, nothing like that. And so after I had raced Thomas, there were a ton of reporters at the pool, left-leaning, right-leaning outlets, everything in between, which again was new to us, our sport. That's not something our sport was used to. And so my inbox on social media, and they would find my email, my parents' email, these reporters, it was filled with people hoping for a quote or for an interview that they could take back to their publisher. And so I pretty naively forwarded them on to her, because again, I trusted my university. I trusted her to do what was best for me. And I still have the messages on my phone. When I sent her this one interview, it was a request from the Daily Wire. And I sent it to her, and she said, "Thanks, I declined it for you." And that's when I responded back, "I don't want you to decline that for me. I didn't give you permission to decline that for me. You don't get to decide what I get to do." To which she responded back, "Remember what we talked about, Riley."
This was your senior year?
Yes.
You're a team captain?
Yes, sir.
How many previous conversations or meetings did you have with the sports information director in your previous 3.5 years?
She ran our social media accounts, so not a lot. We would do, if we sometimes did, like fun interactive stuff for our social media, but
In the previous
minimum.
3.5 years of competing, how often had you had media training and conducted a mock interview?
0 times. And that's with being a 5-time SEC champion. I'd been interviewed, they have your ESPN reporters down there. I've been interviewed by ESPN. I'm the SEC record holder. I'd done high-level interviews. Never once did I have to do training until we were competing against Thomas.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to add to kind of the topic that we're talking about?
I think just something that they repeated over and over and over in those trainings that we had to do was we needed to be respectful of Thomas, using the she, her pronouns, and our team, the general consensus was that we just didn't speak of it. And so it was up until really for me, the first race, them being up on the blocks, hearing the buzzer go off. I think we were kind of all in utter disbelief that this was even happening. And then it was then at the meet when I realized that we were all worried about being respectful of Thomas, yet it was a complete and utter disrespect to us, every single female athlete at that meet, to allow Thomas not only compete with us, but to change in our locker rooms.
I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to open up to the committee for questions. I know Chairman Dixon has a question. One thing that I think a thread that I heard through a couple of your testimony was essentially the fast-moving nature of this. Thomas emerges essentially out of nowhere. You're following whatever you're following online. You see these times being posted. You realize then that Thomas was Will Thomas, formerly competed as a male. You find out 3 weeks ahead of the championship that Thomas will be competing in the championship. And what I heard a couple of you say in a couple of different ways is essentially you kept waiting for someone to stop it. You thought that at some point an adult would step forward, whether that was the NCAA, whether that was your coaches, whether that was Georgia Tech, whether that was an athletic director, whether that was an official, whether that was a politician. You're 19 to 21 years old. And I think while the law may consider you as an adult, I remember when I was 18 and 21 years old, I looked at people like me as the adults, the people that dealt with things like this, the people that had hard conversations, the people that stepped forward in the midst of controversy. Did anyone communicate anything to you? Did anyone say anything publicly that you're aware of? And by anyone, I mean an athletic director, a coach, a college professor, an NCAA official, a member of the Board of Governors. That's really one question. Is that help me understand what the public commentary was at the time from, quote, the adults in the room. And then secondly, is it accurate to say that you all thought that this would be stopped in some capacity and that you were more or less shocked when you came to the reality and you're diving in the pool. You mentioned, Grace, that you blacked out in the midst of your race. And is some of that, you obviously feel that the system let you down, but how much of that was essentially shock that nobody said anything? And then I'll put tangential to that, perhaps to what you've learned since then. Why do you think that is? Because I'm assuming if someone had stepped forward to stop it, we wouldn't be sitting here. So why do you think it was that nobody stepped forward and said anything?
What I will say is virtually everyone knew this was wrong. I'm not claiming to speak for every single person, but I do claim to speak for the overwhelming majority of us. So what I experienced, was I got support through whispers and through winks of coaches saying, "Hey, keep it up." Which was at first, I mean, humbling, right? I felt honored. I felt like kind of after I had taken that initial first leap, pursuing that Daily Wire interview, tons of support flooded in privately. My athletic director, similar to Reka, very supportive. My coach, very supportive. Yet they weren't willing to say anything publicly. And so that same year, I was nominated for NCAA Woman of the Year, which is the most prestigious honor for collegiate female athletes. It's something that encompasses not only your athletic achievement, but also your academic success, where I was the SEC Scholar Athlete of the Year. It encompasses your community service. I was also the SEC Community Service Leader of the Year. So this award represents a well-rounded person, a woman. Each university gets one nominee of all their sports teams. And so when University of Kentucky chose me, I was so honored. We had the #1 WNBA draft pick. We have Abby Steiner, who's breaking world records in track and field, national championship volleyball team, but they chose me. So I was super honored by this until a full list of nominees for NCAA Woman of the Year came out. And it was not exclusive to just women, because University of Pennsylvania nominated Leah Thomas as their NCAA Woman of the Year. And so they had a big convention type setting where they would announce their winner. They had their finalists, they would announce their winner. And so I decided I would go to this, but of course I wasn't going to go necessarily in support. And so I went there. I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't really know much about Title IX at the time. I just knew this was wrong. And so I stood, I literally bought a booth inside the convention hall where I could just stake my area and talk to athletic directors as they walked by. They couldn't ignore me here. I handed out little bracelets that just said Title IX. I don't even know what they said. And every single athletic director that walked by, every single one, thank you for doing what you're doing. Even the president of the NCAA at the time, which was Mark Emmert, has the audacity to say, keep fighting, as if he's not the one that I'm fighting. That's where my frustration, where I feel myself getting so just short-tempered, honestly, with this topic, is because anyone with any amount of sanity, with any amount of common sense, knows that this was not fair, yet no one had the willingness to do something about it. So I think it was, you ask about how we were received, there's support. There's a lot of support. It's just through whispers.
Caitlin.
I think I know you mentioned what was the atmosphere like on the pool deck, to paint you kind of the picture that I vividly see at that meet, looking around, kind of waiting to see is someone going to say something. Honestly, thought there was going to be like a fight that broke out on the pool deck, because I thought it was so outrageous. I don't know how anyone couldn't have said something, or coach, administrator, someone in the NCAA. But in the 500 freestyle, typically at the end of the races, when somebody wins, the crowd's cheering, people on the pool deck are cheering. In that 500 freestyle, when Thomas finished body lengths ahead of the other girls, there was no cheering in that pool environment. This is, the pinnacle of our careers. This is a meet that, typically the atmosphere is very intense. It's exciting. People are cheering and loud. It was the complete opposite of that. You could tell that the morale in that room, everyone knew what was happening was wrong. It was heartbreaking to me. Like, I teared up watching it happen, because I realized the severity of the situation. This wasn't just about Thomas taking away a trophy from those girls there. this was going to impact the future of women's sports if nobody said anything. In the 200 freestyle, I stood and watched Riley stand up on the podium next to Thomas towering over her. And I looked around. I was heartbroken too. I didn't cheer when they called his name. I was furious for her because I trained next to her for years at that point, countless hours and miles. I knew the work that we had put in, and to see that just be put to the side was heartbreaking for me. I was enraged for her because she was a teammate of mine, and I wanted to see her succeed. But that was kind of the atmosphere on the pool deck. I don't think anyone was happy to see Thomas there winning, but yet we were told that that was how it was going to be.
And to very briefly answer the question of why, you said, why were they so fearful? I think a lot of it has to do with federal funding. These universities, they didn't want to lose that. They didn't want to be sued. And that's in talking to these athletic directors after 60, 80 or so walked by, I said, that's great. You feel this way. Would you be willing to put your name to it? No, I can't lose my job. I've got a family to feed. I can't be the one to say something, but you keep going. I don't think they wanted to lose. I mean, it boils down to no red, blue, nothing like that. It's green, I think, with whether it's the institutions. I think we've seen that over the past year or so now, especially with the protests on college campuses regarding what's going on in the Middle East. We see it with corporate America, where corporations are quick to issue an apology statement of some sort when they find themselves losing billions and billions of dollars. And I think the universities fall in line with that.
I would add to that. My example is that I'm working in athletics. I'm working for Virginia Tech swimming and diving. I was part of this team for 6 years. The reason I wrote that letter was because my head coach and the athletic director. Now, when we filed the lawsuit in 2024 March, we had the NCAA championships in Athens, Georgia. We had a press conference there. Caitlin was there as well. Our athletic director from Virginia Tech came there, and he was asked to give an interview at the press conference, but he declined it and said, look, I'm supporting you. I totally agree with you. I'm behind your back no matter what, but this is your battle, not Virginia Tech's. Just because I could lose my job, the school lose the foundations if we stand behind you publicly. And this is the short answer of why they don't speak up.
I recognize Chairman Dixon for a question.
Yeah, first, I just want to make a statement. I just want to thank and grateful for each one of y'all coming and have the courage to speak out against this issue. As the father of two little girls, I'm appalled at what y'all were exposed to. That was nothing less than, just gross perversion that y'all were exposed to. And I'm sorry that happened here in the state of Georgia. And I think that everyone on this committee is committed to make sure that never happens again in this state. But the question I had was for the other ladies. Were y'all sat down and asked or told the same thing as Mrs. Gaines was from the University of Kentucky as far as what to say at that meet at Georgia Tech? If any media inquiries were?
Recognize Kylie first.
I think my university took the approach of silence and acting like this issue didn't exist at all. I think by the time that we even got to the meet, I think I was so conditioned to think that I should also think that it was an issue and that I shouldn't even have feelings or have an opportunity to voice my feelings on the matter, that I didn't even have the courage to go to people in influence over me to even ask them what they could do about it. So, yeah.
Gracie, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. We had conversations as a team going into the competition. I know when Leah's events were released, I was pulled aside because I would be competing directly against Thomas. And for me, I talked a lot about in my testimony, like I tried to push it away because all I really wanted to focus on was swimming, and the weight of having to deal with something that I never saw myself ever having to deal with, and just not having a fair competition at such a high level I didn't know what to say. And frankly, I was scared to speak up, especially in our team meetings, because I wanted everybody else to have the space, and just understand where they're coming from. And I don't know, I didn't feel as comfortable to share my story and how I felt, because I wanted our team to focus on what was most important, which was our success at the swim meet. So frankly, that was just me pushing away that reality, because it was so hard to face. But we did have conversations, and there was a general consensus of support, for myself and my teammates going into that competition.
We recognize Chairman Hickman.
Again, thank y'all so very much for being here and have the courage to step out. Mr. Chairman, I see this as almost a two-pronged situation. We got a sexual harassment issue in the locker room, and then we just got a tremendous unfairness toward women having to compete against men. But that's where I see it, and I don't know how we move forward with that, and maybe that comes out in our report. But it looks like we got two separate issues. We got a sexual harassment issue, which then rolls over. Which then rolls over to the other. But thank y'all for being here.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Abertarte.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. And I think most now have 3 daughters. All of them highly compete at their ages, 2 in high school. And even myself at some level played highly competitive sports when I was in high school, in the sports I played. One thing I want to come back to, Kylie, you mentioned in your comments, you said the Institute silently changed policy on locker room policy. And kind of separately from the facilities, I think, piece that Chairman Dozal has kind of talked about. I know from, seeing my kids compete at a very high level. I know recently we just participated in one of the largest women's high school basketball tournaments in the state of Kentucky. I think there was something like 3,000 female athletes and probably over 300 D1, D2 basketball coaches on site. Saw a lot of things, experienced a lot of things. But I know that, when it comes to the locker room, coaches share at all levels, even me when I've coached girls basketball, kind of the do's and the don'ts and the policy of what happens in the locker room, what you're not allowed to do in the locker room, places you can do, things you can say. There's kind of a code of etiquette in some ways, I think, I'll use that word. Before you got to Atlanta and compete, did your coaching staff or any of your colleagues on your team or teammates, was any of that kind of stuff discussed in terms of, what that experience was going to look like while you were on campus?
There was no communication from our university or the NCAA about the locker room. And honestly, I think just going into the meet, me and my teammates were so frustrated, and just the thing that was at the forefront of our mind was the fact that we'd be competing against a man, and how hard that would be, and how we had never experienced that and didn't know why we were experiencing that, why no one was standing up. It truly wasn't until I was in that experience or in that locker room and saw Leah Thomas that I realized that I thought about the locker room for the first time. And I think that is in part due to we weren't prepared by anybody. And it was traumatizing to know that any man could walk in there because they changed the policies. And I didn't even learn that until months after.
So NCAA, no one at that level shared, like, here are the expectations of the tournament. These are the rules. You step outside these rules. Anything like that related to the locker room? Because I know at the high school level, there, some of that is in place depending on the tournament. And even, I'll relate it to travel basketball. I know those rules are in place too, to protect the athletes, protect the coaches, also protect, the officials and the parents or the organizers. Another question, and I'll be brief. I know we've talked about, kind of the dynamics and impact as you as athletes and your team, and even to the extent, your universities. We know that, such a, highly competitive event, where, you have kind of the country watching, you got athletes from all across the country competing for championships. I mean, what was the reaction to, physicians that were there, trainers that were there, people who are, taking care of you and making sure that you're well in the facility, in the locker room, kind of that supporting cast in terms of the dynamic maybe they were managing while, they were there. Did they kind of find out when they arrived? Or, I mean, I would assume at some level, kind of being in that health and protection space, even down to the paramedic, there's a level of, instruction or dynamic or, kind of rules of engagement that are set out as these events are planned, especially at that level. And again, I'm relating it to what I've seen in this, in the sport of basketball, women's basketball, knowing that those, all the way down to like, are there enough number 2 pencils, like, at one end of a bench, are present and available. Like, so in terms of the health and wellness supporting cast, any communication, any discussion, any scuttle that was kind of talked about during the championships?
I think a similar response in terms of kind of the silence of it, still knowing it was wrong. We're fortunate. Our sport of swimming isn't necessarily a sport where there's lots of physical contact. Like we weren't going to collide with Thomas, or we weren't throwing a ball at one another or jumping into one another or anything like that. But there, of course, have been instances where women have been injured by male athletes. One girl who it was actually, she lives in North Carolina, but she was playing volleyball. A male jumps up, spikes the ball. This is at high school level, hits her in the face. She's knocked unconscious. She's even still, this was in September. Gosh, so 2 years now. September of 2022. She's still partially paralyzed. Her vision is impaired. Her memory is impaired. She has to have special accommodations for testing at school because she can't retain information like she once could. But she actually came down to a specialized doctor in Georgia. And when the doctor found out how she was injured by an athlete who identified as trans, the doctor sent her away and said that we can't see you anymore. That's right here. So we're fortunate that we didn't have to necessarily collide, I guess, or be in that sort of physical contact, or else I would imagine our trainers and the athletic staff who did look after our wellness, I would imagine they would have been forced to make, I guess, take better attention.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Senator Ramon, you're on number 9.
Thank you for coming from out of state and testifying. And thank you for your achievement that, it's great, what you have done in your field. So my quick question is, has any biological man participated in any of the collegiate sports in Georgia other than that of, in Georgia Tech? I mean, anywhere else, any of you, have you heard of, I was trying to find out, it's anything.
Yes. So what we know thus far are there are males competing in tennis and softball and swimming and track and field and cycling, a couple other different sports. And they do, I think, frequent meets and competitions and tournaments in the state of Georgia.
Is there anywhere, can you just provide us if you can,
We could probably get back something to the
sometime,
chairman.
so at least we can see how the,
Absolutely, because this is something that we've been tracking thus far. I know if you look at, there's a website called shewon.org, and it tracks beyond college, all levels, but just what we've been able to record. And so I'm sure we can find those examples of athletes either here in the state of Georgia or that have competed in the state and be able to submit that to the chairman.
Thank you, because I was just concerned about the Georgia, because my understanding, or I understand that.
Well, what happened to us happened
in
in Georgia.
Georgia Tech, whatever it is.
Absolutely. And I will add very briefly that the NCAA championships is set to take place at University of Georgia next year. So you guys have a perfect opportunity while you can to protect those girls. So
UGA next year for for women's swimming and diving.
I believe so.
I thought I read as well that 26 was Tech, so I could be off on that.
You're probably right. You have wonderful facilities in this state As you know, the Olympics were here, so I have always enjoyed some of my best times were swimming in the state of Georgia.
Any other questions, Senator?
Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you. I want to conclude y'all's testimony today by, and this, Senator Ramal's question actually kind of dovetails into my question, because it does get to what we heard here at the Capitol 2 years ago. And those that were opposed to the law that we put in place relative to high school athletics essentially said, look, this is a solution in search of a problem. We don't have this competition is not happening. Lo and behold, it was happening just down the street, just not at the high school level. It was at the collegiate level. It would seem to me that we do not need to wait to have a bunch of high schoolers sitting in your seats telling us about a high school tennis tournament, boxing match, wrestling match, football competition, whatever the sport may be, to have to do something at the high school level. Similarly, I regret that y'all are having to sit here today prior to us having done anything at the collegiate level. I think that there's a little bit, we don't generally pass laws, or I should say we often pass laws recognizing that the threat of something is such that as lawmakers, we should confront it. So with that being said, I would like y'all to take an opportunity to share a word as to what you think this committee should do relative to your sport. Are you satisfied with the latest iteration of the NCAA's rules as it relates to, as I understand it, referring to the governing bodies and animal testing around testosterone, which is a derivation from what Thomas competed under, which was a requirement of some sort of hormone suppression, which was a derivation from the original, which was essentially what we have for high school sports here, which is gender-specific competition relative to gender prescribed at birth. Riley, I know you specifically have traveled the country communicating around this issue, and I'm curious if what you have seen other states do that you think is particularly unique or helpful, and what it would be that we could do that you believe would prevent or would produce the outcome of fair competition.
I believe that the legislative body should pass K through 12. And not necessarily even refer to the Georgia High School Athletic Association, whatever its name is. I believe the legislative body should take action, decisive action, and send the message loud and clear that women are worthy. You're worthy of calling yourself a champion. You're worthy of privacy in areas of undressing. You're worthy of being safe in your sport. You're worthy of your dignity. You guys have the opportunity to send that message to young girls, to women across the state of Georgia, but broader across the United States. And so that's what I would love to see from the legislative body. We've seen other states, 9 thus far, even go as far to pass a law defining the word woman in law, or in other sex-based terms like male, like female, girl, boy. Again, what longevity does a Save Women's Sports bill have if we can't agree on the word woman? Someone said it in their testimony. I believe it was actually Reka. It's very powerful when she said, how do you claim to defend what you can't even define? Saying, hey, we're going to resort to this person. They can make the rules. It's clear what they're doing. They know this is wrong. They see this as wrong. They see this as a liability that they don't want any part in. They've been abdicating accountability for as long as they can. But what I personally would like to see from this committee is to not allow that to happen. We want policies that are fair, safe, number one, and fair for everyone, not just women, not just men, even people who do identify as trans. Of course, they deserve a spot to compete. They deserve somewhere to be able to play, to succeed. Of course they do.
So the NCAA's current policy is more restrictive than the policy that Thomas competed under in 2022.
For some sports,
So
for some sports not.
you believe that's insufficient?
I believe. But this is someone who I would call myself an absolutist on the way that we as women do not owe men. We should not have to give anything for a male to be able to compete with women. There is no scenario where it's fair. There's no amount of testosterone suppression. There's no amount of surgery. There's nothing that a male can do at any age that would make him a woman. Therefore, we should not become the catch-all category. And one more very brief important point. that I believe is important to this committee and understanding, more importantly, the rules that were allowed at this national championships. Grace said in her testimony that she was between two athletes who identified as trans. One was Thomas, again, to very vividly paint the picture, because if we had to see it, I think you guys should have to hear about it. She's next to a 6'4" man in a women's swimsuit, his feet taking up the entire block with a bulge, quite frankly, in his women's suit, next to a woman who is a female, but identified as a man, who we were told we fully had to treat as a man, wearing only a Speedo with nothing covering her top. The optics of that. That's what we were subjected to, and no one dared to even question it. A woman in a Speedo and a man with a bulge in a women's swimsuit, and she's in between them. And she's the one that's told that she's the problem for opposing this, or again, even daring to say, wait, is this fair? She would be reprimanded. So again, I think it's important when you're uncovering these rules to be very clear. I have no problem with a female who born a female, identifying as a man. I have no problem with this person, with this woman competing with us as women, because it's a woman, as long as there's no performance enhancing drugs, which would in fact be doping or cheating, which what did we call Lance Armstrong? We called him a cheater. I have no problem with that. That's not what we were here to talk about at all. But I believe it's important, and the hypocrisy of it. Why has the women's category become the catch-all? If the policy was based on gender identity, then why wasn't Izzy, who now identifies as Isaac, competing at Yale, swimming with the men? Of course, I believe this is rhetorical, because everyone knows why Izzy, now Isaac, is not competing with the men. It's because she would never be able to compete at that same level against the men. So again, just to highlight, not to make it more confusing or more in depth, but an important piece of what we were subjected to.
Thank you, Caitlin. Did you want to add something?
I'll mention that the NAIA conference decided to take the bold step in protecting female athletes by not allowing males with XY chromosomes to compete in the women's category, but they opened up the men's category for anyone and everyone who identifies as whatever they want to compete in that category, which I think covers all the bases, because I think the message that we're trying to send is we're trying to keep the beauty and the integrity and the fairness, equal opportunity, and safety of women's sports intact here. The beauty being sports are a place for everyone. You know, we're not telling anyone they don't have a place to compete. That's the beauty of sports, is anyone with any background, you know, sex, racial identity, sexual orientation, they have a place in sports. But we must maintain the fairness, equal opportunity, and safety of all athletes. And that is by competing in the sex in which you were born with. So men competing in the men's category and women competing in the women's category. And really that's the resolution really that we see in the end here, that we're hoping for, and that we're hoping that Georgia and the NCAA and really states all across the country will resort to.
Thank you. Chairman Abatarte had one last question.
Yeah.
Get your mic on there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Be very brief, but to kind of piggyback off Chairman Dozal, when we think about looking ahead to the conversation about K-12. So if we have, you know, aspiring young female athletes who's going to be the next Riley, Grace, Kylie, Caitlin, you know, and they've been, you know, kind of put in a scenario to where, you know, they're using one facility that's literally being shared, a football facility I'll use, because it's been a debate in our community where boys and girls are sharing it, one restroom for boys. And then one day the female athletes are told, hey, well, we recognize now we have a problem after so many years, but we're going to send you up to the main high school facility. So we have separation, but I don't know if it's really equal. And so as we think about, you know, Mr. Chairman, you know, safety, competitiveness, but also too, I think, you know, leadership of what we're teaching in those environments for our future aspiring athletes to not be put in a compromised, you know, situation where, you know, whether it's, you know, male coaches walking in at any time they want, female coaches even walking onto the boys' side at any time. I mean, would y'all find that to be an appropriate, environment for a aspiring female athlete to grow up in?
I'm not sure if I entirely understand, but I'm the biggest advocate for calling out an injustice when you see it. Obviously with the stand that I believe that we've taken. And so, certainly, I mean, this sounds like a case by case type of thing, but let's say this hypothetical situation where girls are sent to a different facility that is lesser than, the resources aren't there, the funding, whatever it might be. I'm the biggest advocate for being bold, standing up for yourself, and calling out that injustice. And so there are many problems that exist in women's sports. There's no doubt about that. We could spend our time talking about, tons of problems that exist. This is just one that we've spent our time today talking about. But I think if something like that arises, it's something you handle promptly if doable.
Thank you, members of the committee, for your good questions. Ladies, thank you so much for being here today. We have a couple of, actually one person that signed up to testify publicly, so we're going to make room for that. Would invite you to go ahead and grab your seats again if you don't mind. And then I believe that you're going to make yourselves available for the media after this as well. But thank you all again for traveling. I think each one of you from out of state, and taking times away from your schedules to be in here and making yourselves available to this committee. We do have one person signed up to speak, and that is Chelsea Thompson. Chelsea, if you come up to the podium, I already said your name, but if you could reintroduce yourself, tell us who you're with, and we'll give you 2 minutes, please.
Wonderful. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you also, ladies, for coming to speak. I will say I played softball through high school, but I did not have to undergo any of these horrible experiences that you all had to endure. So thank you for coming and sharing. We'll keep it this brief, Mr. Chairman, but we're here. So my name is Chelsea Thompson, General Counsel with Frontline Policy here in Georgia. And we're here to show support and just echo, with the women here today and advocate for the importance of codifying a prohibition of biological males competing in female sports, in addition to keeping women safe with separate spaces such as female and male designated locker rooms, bathrooms, showers, and the like. As you've heard the women mentioned today, there are just numerous reasons why we have to pass a Save Girls sports legislation here in Georgia. A few of those being, as the ladies have mentioned in their testimony, unfair biological advantages, equal opportunity, violation of privacy and safety and self-worth, and mental and emotional anguish. We wholeheartedly agree with Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, who's just in here, that we need to protect female sports. Mentioned at the beginning of this meeting also by the chairman that HB 1084 from 2022, those of you familiar, was a temporary stopgap measure, just to be clear. It was one that effectively advocated the responsibility that the legislature has to set clear and firm state policy on this issue that protects all female athletes in the state. And to add to this conversation, I think it's important that in bipartisan polling results in Georgia, a resounding 83% oppose biological males competing in female sports competitions. And this holds across all demographic groups as well. So legislation for protecting girls' sports has passed in 24 states also, and we are looking forward to Georgia being among those states. I want to say, too, that we're grateful for this committee tackling this issue. You here in the committee really do, as Riley mentioned, have a part of answering the problem that the state's facing and that many girls in the state are facing, and that you've heard from the women today. There's been women and girls that have been harmed, and the question our state is asking is really like, what are our leaders going to do about it? So we look forward to seeing, what we're going to do, and also future generations being able to look back and see what the leaders did and the actions that you guys took. Lastly, I will say I prepared a document from the HB 1084 and kind of listing out the reasons why we need specific Save Girls legislation and why that 1084 is not specific, and I'm happy to share it with the committee. But that's it. If there's any questions in the committee, I'm happy to answer them.
Let's see any questions. Thank you, Ms. Thompson.
Thank you.
We do have two people that want to testify online. I believe we have we weren't necessarily prepared for that, but I think that the Senate press team has figured that out. Thank you all for your work in doing that. I believe I saw Kate Smith's name up there. So we'll go ahead, Kate, and turn the floor over to you for 2 minutes. And if you don't mind just giving us a mic check first, I'll let you know that we can hear you, and then you can go ahead with your testimony, your comments.
Thank you. Thank
We
you.
do
Can
have
you hear me?
We do. Thank you.
Great. Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Kate Smith. I am the Director of LGBTQI+ policy at the Center for American Progress. I grew up playing soccer, golf, and co-ed competitive martial arts. Those like myself who are athletes or who love athletes know that sports teaches us valuable lessons like discipline and how to work on a team. In addition to being an athlete, I'm also a researcher. It's important to me that we follow the science and get the real facts about the inclusion of transgender students in sports. After extensive research and analysis, the Center for American Progress published their report, Fair Play, on this issue. Here's what we know. While those who support excluding transgender students from sports promote anecdotal evidence they believe show trans people negatively impact women's sports, the data does not back this up. Women and girls' participation in sports is only going up. Further, the trans community is actually underrepresented in sports. While the Olympics has allowed trans women to compete since 2004, no trans women have medaled. In addition to the Olympics, several professional and recreational leagues have trans-inclusive policies. Many here today are focused on one student who won one final at one championship 2 years ago. If trans women have such a clear advantage in sports, why do we not see them winning many more championships and filling team rosters? At the college level, the NCAA has allowed trans students to participate since 2011, though individual schools and sports are able to set their own policies. These specific policies are often tailored to their sport and their community, as they should be. Decisions about what works best for a given sport or school should be made by the schools and sports associations themselves, not by politicians. When trans people go through transition, their bodies change. Supporting trans-inclusive policies is not supporting men in women's sports. It is supporting women in women's sports. Equality is an issue in women's sports, but trans people are not the reason why. Women's sports are underfunded and under-resourced. We can and should encourage women and girls to play sports, and better yet, we do not need to exclude athletes to do so. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions as well.
Thank you, Kate. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, we do have one other person. Is Sasha still with us? Okay, we don't think we have Sasha. Sasha, if you are there, our apologies. We're not seeing you online, and we certainly welcome your participation in a future committee meeting. Members of the committee, as I mentioned, we'll be meeting monthly between now and December. Watch your emails for notification of those upcoming meetings. And with that, this committee meeting is adjourned. Thank you.